Okay, so we're going to talk about dependent arising, how things exist interdependently. How things exist interdependently, which is really the conclusion from all the teachings we hear. This lamrim little package that we learn about, all the teachings are laid out. And actually, it's not evident to us, but it's leading our minds to this point. In terms of the lamrim, this is coming at the end. Everything is about how things exist from day one, the very first level karma, about the mind, about compassion. It's all Buddha's view about how things exist, that it's the conventional reality. And now we get finally to understand ultimately how things exist. So it's very organic and logical, but in the beginning we can't always see it, you know. So we're going to discuss a little bit this idea of dependent arising and emptiness. And the relevance of it is the most important part. How do you apply it in daily life? How does it help me suffer less and get more happy? How does it help me help others? Thinking like that. So we just thinking we're here for this reason, to take some tools from all this so we can develop our potential, so we can help others. And we remember our reliance on the Buddha and his teaching. Sangye Choran Soke Tognam La, Jancho Baru Dagni Kapsuchi, Dagi Chunyan Gipes Onam Ki, Drola Penchir, Sangye Drupa Shog, Sangye Choran Soke Tognam La, Jancho Baru Dagni Kapsuchi, Dagi Chunyan Gipes Onam Ki, Drola Penchir, Sangye Drupa Shog. The first thing I said was in English, and the next two are like translations. That's it. So yeah, there we go. Thank you so much. That's done. There it is. I go refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and I listen to these teachings so I become Buddha to benefit all. Okay. So we look at this lamrim, if we're a bit familiar with these teachings, the way Tsongkhapa has packaged all of Buddha's teachings based upon this little text that Atisha wrote in the 11th century, because when he got to Tibet, Dharma had been flourishing there for several hundred years, but they kind of like lost the plot a little bit, you know. So what he took all the main points from this extraordinary body of knowledge since the time of the Buddha, 1,000 plus years, 1,400 years of it. The teacher was about 11th century in Tibet. And what he did was he took all the main points from it and he put them down in this little package. Tsongkhapa in the 14th century uses his basis of his commentary and he called it the lamrim, this graded course. It's a graded course. He called it a path. Well, we call it a course. And all courses by definition are graded, are gradual, aren't they? A gradual path. When you study music, you're going along a gradual path. You end up in middle simple stuff, and you graduate at the end. You learn math and eventually you graduate as a physicist. Everything's like that. That's how we learn everything. I think it's a surprise to us to hear that we learn a spiritual path in that way. But this is the Buddhist approach. So a teacher took these main points from the body of this vast body of knowledge and presented them in an orderly way, orderly according to the capacity of the disciple, which is perfectly normal. But the crucial point was it was also in terms of how to taste it, how to practice. And each one led to the next one organically. What to internalize in what order, you know. So one way of putting it, I just said before, is all the teachings in the first scope, middle scope, and getting to the great scope, compassion wing, all the way through the 6 perfections until the 6th perfection. All of that is Buddha's presentation of how the universe exists conventionally. And even if we get that far already, we can be pretty blissful by this point, because at least we're in touch with reality, even conventionally. Our trouble is we not only don't know about ultimate reality, but we're also in la-la land when it comes to even conventional reality. We're not in touch with reality at all. No wonder we suffer. And this is Buddha's point. What knowing reality has got to do with anything for the Buddha is because suffering comes from not being in touch with reality. That's a kind of a surprise to us. Buddha says we suffer because we're not in touch with reality. I mean, that's very surprising. We think we suffer because we've got a mean boyfriend. No, he says it's our mind. So we've made up lots of misconceptions. We're living in la-la land. We're not in touch with reality. If we hear this point, then all the teachings make sense. And all these teachings, starting with karma, Buddha's saying, listen, guys, this is how I've found This is what I have seen to be reality. In reality, things exist. You know, everything you think and do and say, like we talked yesterday, everything you think and do and say programs you and produces your future. Big surprise to us. That's reality, he says. You see, when we hear that when it comes to religion, we think it sounds like dogmatic. But excuse me, if you have Einstein say, well, I think 1 + 1 is 2, I don't want to be dogmatic about it, you'd be in trouble. Or if you have someone teaching you how to make a cake, well, it could be 2 teaspoons, but you could put 7 if you'd like. No, you can't. So dogmatic means being precise, not you must believe it. Precision is crucial. The Buddha's telling us from his perspective, this is reality. That actually, you're not an innocent victim. You're not created by a creator. You're not created by your mummy and daddy. You are the fruit of your own past. You're your own creator, babe. That's pretty powerful. So living according to those laws, already you're turning yourself into a marvelous, happy person. You can guarantee that when you die, you'll get another decent human body and you won't lie, won't steal, won't kill, and won't get killed or lied to. Wow, who doesn't want that? Bare minimum. Then he goes further in the middle scope. He gets you start looking at the mind, which is the source of everything. And now you start to really become your own therapist and you delve deep into the mind based on the Buddha's view of the mind, which is not your brain, babe. I'm sorry. It's non-physical. It's the actual experiential cognitive process itself. And the teachings on the mind in the worldview of Buddha are extensive, are extraordinary. I mean, just the epistemological model alone of how the mind functions is super amazing. And then the psychological model, which is stressed in the middle scope. And the whole key point here is to learn to identify the neuroses in the mind. The Buddha says are just the habit that we've had for so many lifetimes that misrepresent the world to us. So when we hear the first level of teachings about karma, the explicit teaching is about cause and effect. If you don't want suffering in the future, then stop causing it. That's the explicit teaching. But actually, implicitly, it's leading us to emptiness. Because karma, the law of cause and effect, is a brilliant example of the first level of dependent arising, of which there are 3. The first level of dependent arising, which is that things exist in dependence upon causes. So this I is the fruit, not of causes out there called mummy, daddy, creator, but causes that I created in my mind before. So this is already leading us to loosen the grip on ego grasping, to stop feeling like a victim, which is what ego grasping causes. Then you get to the middle scope, and now you start to delve into the mind. This is the explicit teaching there is to see the disturbing character of attachment and aversion and the others, and be sick of the suffering that they are causing. That's the explicit teaching. But implicitly, when we start to realize that those disturbing emotions are delusional in their character, this is helping us understand the root delusion, which we get to when we get to emptiness, which is it's only really then when we get to listen to the teachings on emptiness and dependent arising that we hear that the root misconception called ego grasping, marigpa, ignorance, that how it functions is to misrepresent the world to us. So again, the explicit practice in the middle scope is to stop the suffering because you're sick of the pain of the disturbing emotions. But implicitly, we start to realize the deluded characteristic of them. How attachment is deeply disturbing. But why? It's because it's a lie in the mind. It's literally a misconception that's been there for countless lifetimes that literally causes that cake out there on that plate to appear far more delicious than it actually is. So it's misrepresenting. And this is preparing us to hear the root delusion that misrepresents the very intrinsic, the very ontological status of things. So all the Lamrim is leading us to emptiness. It mightn't be evident to us, but the more we understand it, the more we can see that that's true. This is really getting to the point for the Buddha. Because if we look at the 4 noble truths, second noble truth, there are causes of suffering, and there are 2 main ones. One is karma, we learned about that in the first scope, and then the second one is the delusions, we learned that about in the middle scope. This is getting us to clearly see the causes of suffering and want to give them up. So now when we get to the, we get to the first and second scopes, which are the renunciation. We get renunciation from all that. We are sick of suffering. We now know what it's caused by, our own mind and our past karma. So we practice hugely. Then we get to the compassion wing, this is the great scope. And to continue to work on our mind, that never ceases. So now it's in reference to how to break down these self-imposed barriers between self and other because of those delusions, because of negative karma. So then we start to develop these amazing states of mind, love, compassion, great compassion, which culminates in this outrageous attitude called bodhicitta, such that now having it, only others are your concern. This is very shocking for us in the modern world. There's no longer the ordinary thought of I, because you've done the work, So now you practice as a bodhisattva, bopping from life after life after life after life, perfecting the previous stages of the path, basically. The first 4 perfections, you're perfecting the compassion wing, generosity, morality, patience, and perseverance. And the last 2 perfections, concentration and emptiness, you're perfecting the wisdom wing. Now, in reality, those teachings are not Mahayana in their character. They're actually Hinayana. They're part of the path that we share with the Hinayana path. Emptiness necessarily is what a Hinayana yogi needs to achieve nirvana. So it's not a Mahayana teaching in its nature, nor is concentration. In fact, concentration comes from the Hindus. But they're taught by Tsongkhapa at the end of the path as the perfections of the bodhisattva. So much more profound. They're seen in the context of the rest of the path. They're seen in the framework of bodhicitta. Far more powerful perfections. So in order to realize dependent arising and emptiness, the 6th, the wisdom is the 6th one, you need to get concentration. That's pretty clear. In fact, as Lama Yeshe says in Mahamudra, it is impossible to realize emptiness until you've got single point of concentration. And the simple reason is because it's so subtle, because the mistake of ego grasping, the root delusion, is so utterly primordial. We can learn all about it intellectually, which we must do, but to finally see the mistake it causes is impossible without having single point of concentration. In other words, you have to access the subtlest level of our mind. I think of it as like the microscope of our mind. Only with that level of subtlety of focus can we begin to unpack and unravel the mind, to get to see nakedly how there never has been, isn't, and never could be an independent I. So Buddha's telling us that everything exists interdependent. Okay, so the 2 truths is a really good framework for understanding this final way that things exist. Finally, ultimately, finally. The 2 truths is a great way, a great framework, which is Tsongkhapa's specialty. As Lama says, paraphrasing Tsongkhapa, dependent arising is the king of logics to prove emptiness. And that it's a guaranteed way to ensure, as Tsongkhapa would put it, that we don't fall into the abyss of the great mistake, become nihilistic, and think that emptiness means nothing. If we see it in the framework of conventional reality, then we will never fall into the abyss of the great mistake. So things existing conventional, and as I said, the entire path, karma, the mind, bodhicitta, are all how things exist conventionally. At least get that clear. Now that leads us to go further, to realize how things are ultimately, finally. So right now, okay, the two truths, conventional reality, how things exist conventionally. And then there's things exist ultimately. There's an ultimate or final way that things exist, and there's a conventional way that things exist. How about the same? So the the best method, the best logical reasons to use the king of logics to realize emptiness is dependent arising. So the first big mistake we make when we hear that things exist conventionally, and then we hear that they don't exist ultimately. And the way to say how things exist ultimately is they don't. Way of putting it is that. Then of course we can't help but hear, even when we hear the word empty, we immediately assume, therefore there's no I. Automatically, we can't help but hear that. We fall into the abyss of the great mistake. That's the greatest mistake, it seems, in the world, in the understanding of this word emptiness and of what it means. The greatest mistake is that. But it's deeply instinctive in us to hear it like that. But in the Heart Sutra, Buddha's telling us right there that you can't have conventional without ultimate. The two truths, they're two flip sides of the same coin. There are two different ways that one thing exists. You can't have one without the other. That's a crucial one to even just know intellectually. You can't have one without the other. There are two different ways of saying how something exists. So in the Heart Sutra, Lord Buddha, in his meditation, conveys these thoughts to his disciples talking, who then speak the words. He says, he takes the first of the five aggregates as one group of components, because the whole Heart Sutra is this list, isn't it? This list of the components of the world according to Buddha's view. You've got the five aggregates, which is the way of presenting, first of all, the entire impermanent world, or specifically a person, the five components that make up a person. Then you've got the four noble truths, you've got the 12 links, you've got the 18 constituents, I consciousness and the object of the conscious, the 6 consciousnesses. And then there's sense bases, all these 18 of these things. So just listing this list of components of the universe, how they're all empty, and how we have to realize that for all of them. So then he starts saying form, which is the first of the five aggregates, first of the five components that we're made up of. And it refers to the physical. And he says form is empty. And then he says emptiness is form. And all he's telling us is that you can't have one without the other. That basically, the simplest way to put it is that emptiness, as opposed to being nothingness, is simply the absence of something. And that is a quality, it's simply a characteristic of something that exists. So you can't possibly find the emptiness of form if you don't first posit form. Because emptiness, you see, is not just some word, oh, well, it's all empty. Well, where does emptiness exist? Well, I don't know, out there somewhere, there's this big space, emptiness. This is meaningless. The absence of independent existence, the absence of independent existence is a characteristic of something that exists. You can't find emptiness without finding a thing that exists. Emptiness is not nothingness that exists in the sky somewhere. Emptiness meaning absence of independent existence. Absence of independent existence is a characteristic of a thing that exists conventionally. Once you know those words, you can't have one without the other, and you'll never fall into the abyss of the great mistake. Of course, we've got to get our head around that. It sounds pretty abstract, So emptiness just means absent, not there, empty, not there. And they talk about, as Lama Yeshe stresses, they talk about, Lama Zopa talks about ordinary emptiness. So there's like an example, and then there's the emptiness of independent existence. It's a particular term they use in Tibetan. But, ordinary emptiness is like the absence of something, So you could say that there does exist, on my table. If you look at the table here and see there's a vase and all these things, you would say there is no elephant on my table. You could say that. It's true. There is no elephant on my table. Another way of saying that there does exist on my table the absence of an elephant. It's true. You can see there's no elephant, isn't it? That's an ordinary emptiness. So if I look in my cup and I'm expecting tea and I go, oh, there's no tea. So there is no tea in my cup. Another way to put it is, in my cup, there does exist the absence of tea. It sounds kind of cute, but that's the way to put it. In other words, to say, oh, there's no tea in my cup sounds a bit nihilistic, but there does exist in my cup. There does exist in my cup the absence of tea. That the absence of tea is a vivid thing you can get hold of and taste, and you have to cognize that. It's a thing that you exist. Because the mind cognizes nouns. That's how I put it. The way mind cognizes phenomena is in terms of being a thing. The mind cognizes, there are 6 synonyms for that which exists: phenomenon, object, object of knowledge, existent, established base. Maybe there's one more, I can't remember. They're all the names of what exists in the universe. And Buddha's deal is he wants us to see what exists, because we're in La La Land cognizing things that don't exist. So you have to grab hold of a thing, and then the mind cognizes that. So it's like nouns. Buddha, so an event, an action, a thing, a person, an event, an action. I am walking. The mind cognizes action of walking. There is a cup. The mind cognizes cup. The mind cognizes tea in the cup. The mind also cognizes the absence of tea in the cup. So the absence of tea in the cup is a phenomenon that does exist and can be cognized. That's how to hear it. So it's not there's nothing. That's nihilistic. The mind is cognizing the absence of something. So the yogi eventually, with single point of concentration, after all the years of practicing and going through the stages of first and realizing conventional reality, removing all the conventional nonsense, finally, one day, the penny will drop and they will see for the first time that there never has been, isn't, and never could be an independent I. So what they see then, for the first time, is the absence of that I. And their whole life changes now. As Lama Zopa says, the best yogis have total, unbelievable bliss, finally seeing the truth. Even the good yogis have total panic, fear, unbelievable fear. Because what Buddha's saying is, this delusion, the root delusion known as ignorance, maharipa, underpins all the others. It's totally implicit, totally there, so subtle we can't even see it. And all the other delusions come from it. Expressions of it are rooted in it. So it's implicit in all the other delusions. So attachment exaggerates. So the delusions have one main key job, one job they all share. They exaggerate, they embellish, they decorate. Lama Zopa says they decorate. So what the delusions do is decorate on top of what is there, layers upon layers upon layers of characteristics that aren't there. That's what they do. So each has got their own job. So attachment exaggerates, embellishes, decorates deliciousness onto something. Aversion, anger, decorates ugliness onto something. Arrogance decorates self-importance onto me. Low self-esteem decorates lack of, ugliness and hopelessness onto me. They all decorate. And in that sense, they are delusional. So attachment is the overt, explicit, the kind of obvious delusion that's running rampant when you see the chocolate cake. Attachment in the cake coming from a neurotic sense of me, miserable, low self-esteem, empty, poor, miserable me. The stronger that is, the more intense the attachment, the more intense the decoration of deliciousness onto the cake that appears utterly true to us, utterly, absolutely true. We all believe that deliciousness is there, coming from the cake. So there's deliciousness. Attachment exaggerates the deliciousness, but ego grasping, ignorance underpinning the attachment, you can't have one without the other, exaggerates the very ontological status of delicious chocolate cake. It's there from its own side, in and of itself, in its nature, naturally, having nothing to do with my mind seeing it. All of those are lies. That's not how the cake exists, Buddha says. So the first one to understand, the first level of dependent arising, Buddha presents three that are explicit arguments with the previous views, that there can be an I or a soul or a self and anything else that has an is not caused. So this idea of an Atman, or self, Christians call it a soul. It's permanent, unchanging, uncaused. Cause and effect argues with that. So you apply that to I, when you think about karma, and you apply it to the cake. That in that cake, you will not find any cake, any part of the cake that isn't the result of causes. It's the result of causes. The second level dependent arising, same with the I. So the second level dependent arising, we use I as the object now. The name of this phenomenon is called I, or me, or person, or self. They're all synonyms. So due to there being this ego grasping, the colloquial term we can use for this marigpa, this ignorance when it comes to I, it totally believes there is in here somewhere, among all the other thousands of bits and pieces, we know we're made of parts. Millions, if you start to count all the components. So I like to use the IKEA example. If you have to construct an eye, when you go to IKEA, you see it on the picture on the computer, and you go and they give you a box of bits. You're very disappointed. You've got to create your own eye. You're going to have millions of pieces, aren't you? Millions. And this is the type of meditation that's a really good one. Except Buddha didn't use the example of IKEA. And the meditation you do in this one is the other way around. You have the I already built and you deconstruct it. We're doing the other way. We're constructing it. So we have to look at all the parts of the I. And there's got to be very specific, because there are very specific parts. IKEA knows you need 2 legs and 5 toes and 5 fingers. They don't give you 17 fingers and you choose. They give you 2 breasts and 1 this and 1 that, because they know how to make a table. They know how to make an eye. So there's all these very specifically chosen pieces, exactly the right size, that if you put them all together, you'll get the eye, get the table. We know that. It's a really good analogy. So instead of doing the one that they demand in the Buddhist approach, which is you get your eye as you are now and you throw all the pieces out. You throw out all the pieces one by one, looking for the piece that we believe is there, called I. Buddha says there isn't one. You don't need one. You don't need a piece called I that's independent of the other parts. This level of dependent arising. We believe, because of this ego grasping, that there is. Our language expresses it. We feel it every day. It's implicit for us. And this is the root cause of all suffering, of all of the realms of existence, of all of samsara, of the entire universe. The root lie. So we use this argument of things exist in dependence upon their parts as the logic to prove that there isn't a piece called I in here, and that you don't need one. It's a decoration. It's an exaggeration. It's an embellishment. So here, one of the arguments to get this clear for us, they call it one and many. Sounds so silly to us. If something exists conventionally, you have to point it out. And if there's either one thing or there's more than one. So I will give you simple example. I will say, I have a cup and a computer. I have a cup and a computer. So with knowing those words, we've all done our definitions. We know what a computer is. We know what a cup is. We've learned the definitions. We have eyes that are working reasonably well. And then we see over here, we see these shapes and colors. And we know the label is computer, and we know the label is cup. And we know the third label, I. So there's 3 nouns there, aren't there? 3 nouns, 1 pronoun and 2 nouns. So there are 3 phenomena I mentioned. 3. And if it's true, you have to point them out. Very pretty clear. So you point out this I. This is the phenomenon called I, which isn't the phenomenon called cup. And it isn't the phenomena called computer. So you have three separate phenomena. You have to have reasonably, logically, ordinary communication. Ordinary communication. If you say there is a computer and there is a cup on my table, that's two phenomena. But I'm saying I have, that's three. So it's three. So it's easy. You can point out an I that isn't a computer, an I that isn't dependent upon a computer. That's what independent means here in a very simple, the most absolute way. I and computer are independent insofar as they do not depend upon each other for their existence. There's no relationship. And so if computer falls down and crashes, Robina's still intact. If Robina drops dead, computer doesn't disintegrate. It's intact because they're separate and independent. It's the most radical one. They're both separate and independent. Same with the cup. So there are three phenomena there. Very simple. Well, I'm going to make another statement, and this is where it gets more nuanced and more tricky and more confusing to us. I have a nose and an ear. How many nouns? Three. Ear, there it is. It's not the same as the nose. It's independent of the nose. If the nose is blocked, which it is, because I'm back in Santa Fe, isn't it? Then the ear is still listening. And if the ear is deaf, the nose still works. They're two separate and independent phenomena. What about the third phenomena called I? Where's that? Very simple. Where is it? And meaning, where is there an I that is independent of the other parts? Where is there an I that's independent of the nose? Where is there an I that's independent of the ear? As we say, I have a nose and an ear, three things. So you've got to point out three independent, separate things. And all Buddha's saying is, sorry, guys, you won't find the third one or the first one. You won't find the I. There is no I that's independent of the ear and independent of the nose. But as the more subtle one here, they are inseparable, though, because the I does exist, but not separately, not differently. That's the tricky part. There is an I that does exist in dependence upon the ear and the nose and all the other thousands of pieces, but not separately, not differently. That's what we have to get to understand. But when we say there is an I, we think it is referring to something that's separate and different, some little kind of golden thing in the middle around about here that's the owner of the ear and the nose. We all believe that. Absolutely. I am the boss and I own these parts. That's a misconception. In this case, there's another misconception we make in other situations in our life. When we say I, we mean all of me. And this seems very abstract to us. So we're saying here that if I is all of me, then you mean I is the same as the nose. If it's all one thing, I, then why would you say I have a nose? Because what you're really saying is I have an eye, and how silly that is. If eye and nose are synonymous, then eye and ear are synonymous, and eye and toe are synonymous. So you have a million eyes. It's so silly. It doesn't make much sense to us initially, but this is crucial to do this kind of clear arguing, because delusions are completely misconceptions. We've got to use logic to argue with them. As Lama Zopa says, the name I can't be the base. This is why there's big talk all the time about the basis of imputation. That I finally, now the third one, the subtlest one of this dependent arising, after these two of causes and then parts, is that there's no I. There's no I that is not the result of causes. There's no I that's independent of the parts. And there's no I that's independent of the mind labeling it I. So the I does exist as merely labeled I. That I is the name we impute with our mind where? Upon the base, which is the parts. So the I can't be the parts. Cup is the name we give to this phenomenon here. I need a drink. So cup is the name we give this one. So we say, there is a cup. There is a cup, we say. Well, actually, there is the basis for the label cup. There's the parts. What that is, a base, the sides, a handle. They're the basis of the name cup. And it's pretty clear, because if you remove the parts, if you take away the base and you take away the sides, you take away the handle, well, even the handle's not necessary, just the base and the sides. Then we assume, we say my cup has a base. My cup has sides. Like we say, my eye, an ear, two things. So if there is both parts and cup here, then when you take the parts away, you should be left with the owner, called the cup. Same here. Once you take away all the parts, in the way Buddha does the analysis, or they say, instead of the other one, the IKEA one, which is already completed, it's built. If you take away all the parts, but in piles out there, like it is in the IKEA box, then you have to be ending up with an eye. So that if you go to IKEA and buy the eye in the box, and you're gradually building the eye, you put the feet on the breasts, the this, the that, the bones, the things, and you keep waiting for this special little piece that you're getting worried you can't find yet, called eye. Where's the eye? Because you can't be an eye if you don't have an eye. You're waiting for the eye to come in a special little Ziploc bag with gold writing. But you're going to have all the parts, and you'll complete the construction, and you'll put the box upside down, and you didn't find an eye. You're going to have a panic attack because you don't need one. Because you know why? Because the parts do fine, working together interdependently to produce an eye. We believe there's a little boss called I that runs the show. It's a conspiracy theory. We believe it's like it's the same philosophical view as believing in a creator that pulls the strings, that runs the universe. You don't need one. It's an exaggeration. But there is an I that does exist. As Tsongkhapa says in one of his Lamrim texts, the yogi in the meditation is experiencing the absence of this intrinsic I that she knows there's no I from its own side. But nevertheless, conventionally, the I functions exactly as you say. It still functions. Nevertheless, it still functions. So there is no cup from its own side. But nevertheless, it still functions to hold your tea. So everything doesn't exist and does exist. Put it like that. As Lama Zopa says it. When we really understand emptiness, there is, from the side of I here, there is not one atom of anything that is I. So when we realize that, he says, what does exist? So when we realize there is no I here from its own side, it's as if there is no I. But dependent arising, there is. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't. This is a perfect way of putting the two truths, So emptiness doesn't contradict existence. In fact, emptiness reinforces existence. Because things exist because they don't have an intrinsic nature. Because they're empty of an intrinsic nature. That's how come they exist. Something that has an intrinsic nature can't exist. It's not viable. It's an impossibility. So things exist because they are empty. Everything, they talk in Tantra, everything arises out of emptiness. Because things do not have an intrinsic nature, because things are not set in stone, because things that do not exist in and of themselves, because things do not exist independently of parts and causes and the mind. Therefore, it does exist and does function. That's the way to understand, Even first intellectually, so delicious. So what's the point of this in daily life? It's all very nice intellectually. So His Holiness, one time he was asked, how do you apply emptiness in daily life? He said, it's very simple. See things from another point of view, which is exactly what dependent arising is. But with ego grasping, we see it as absolute, set in stone. It is that. So there is an I. It is bad. You are evil. Everything is fundamentalist. That's the function of ego grasping. Absolute, concrete, set in stone, no dependence, no space, no interdependence. But just simply being able to see something from another point of view implies it has no intrinsic nature as this or that. It's the simplest way to apply emptiness in daily life. See it from another point of view. All of the teachings lead us to this. It's implicit from day one. That's why to begin, first the karmic teaching, as I said, the overt teaching, the explicit teaching is be a nice person, behave yourself, don't harm others. But gradually you start to practice it and you start to realize why you're not harming others, because you don't want suffering, because you created the cause. And so you start to realize there's a dependent arising in there. And then you start to realize how, how you are the fruit of your own past, and you are the cause of your future. That loosens the grip of ego grasping, because it's self-pity. Then you get to the mind and you start dealing with the painful and suffering of delusions. But then underneath you start to realize how they're misconceptions, which is more subtle. They fabricate. And then you get to compassion. And the practice of compassion is an unbelievable, like atomic bomb on ego grasping. It's not the direct antidote. You see, wisdom needs its own specific approach. You'll never realize emptiness. You can have bodhicitta till the cows come home. It'll never help you realize emptiness. It'll never get you to realize directly emptiness. It'll help you. It's a catalyst. Because every time you have compassion, you're loosening the grip of I and you're reaching out to other. But wisdom has its own specific practice. You have to work with the mind in the way we're discussing here to get emptiness. But you have to practice bodhicitta to get compassion. So the Hinayana Arhat is realizing emptiness, getting out of samsara, but hasn't got compassion, hasn't got bodhicitta, the radical levels of compassion, or the culmination of radical levels of compassion. Still more work to do. So wisdom is one specific approach and compassion is the other, but each helps the other. Every time you loosen the grip of I, every time you reach out to another and practice patience, you're putting atomic bombs under I. Every time you loosen the grip of I, then it makes you closer to other. Because positing other is a function of having an I, believing in an I. So when you realize emptiness, there's no longer the thought of other. Then you radicalize that by then getting compassion. Any questions, anybody? Any questions on chat there? Lou? Nothing? Anybody got any thoughts to bring up? Points to make? Things to discuss? Points to get more clear? So the biggest one is when we read the literature, when we read the books. It's so important when we hear the word emptiness. You've got to spell it out. It's emptiness of independent existence. So what is it? You've got to then ask, well, what is it referring to? Well, basically, like I said, it's referring to the absence of something. So you see, this one about things existing, it's a really important one in Buddhism. When you start to learn the Buddhist philosophy in the very first text, which is called Collected Topics, you learn these nuts and bolts of what exists. Phenomena, causes, the mind, this, 8 of this, 7 of that. You get this kind of worldview, So the very first one is Buddha's trying to get us to cognize that which exists, which means to stop cognizing things that don't exist, which is the function of the delusions. Attachment exaggerates, sees a delicious cake there, and ego grasping sees an intrinsic I there, and anger sees an ugly person there. All the delusions decorate. It's their job. So we're not in touch with reality because of that. So what Buddha's trying to get us to do is become in touch with reality, with what exists. So here's the thing about the mind, whatever the mind cognizes, it's called a phenomenon. It's called a thing, if you like. The mind's always cognizing something. So to say nothingness, how can you cognize nothingness? Nothingness can't exist. Nothingness can't exist. It's an absurd idea. There's always something that the mind is cognizing. So if there is tea in my cup, then I can cognize the phenomenon called tea. If there is no tea in my cup, this is what I'm getting at, then how is the mind cognizing that phenomenon? How is the mind cognizing that tea, that lack of tea? It cognizes the phenomenon called the absence of tea. It turns it into a noun, not, oh, there's no tea. It cognizes absence of tea. It's very specific. It's not just playing with words. It's the way the mind works. We know about absences. This is the ordinary absences. And think about this one. The only person who's going to notice, who's going to cognize absence of tea, is the person who's expecting tea. If you walk into the crockery shop, into the shop where you buy cups and saucers, you don't say, oh, mummy, there's no tea in the cups. You won't see the absence of tea in those cups because you don't expect tea to be in the cups, not in the shop. So here, this is a very interesting extra point, the dynamism of seeing something, absence of something somewhere. You expect the keys in your drawer as you're rushing out to go somewhere where you're late, and you open the drawer. There's nothing in the drawer. It's true, there is nothing in the drawer. That's nihilism. There is nothing in the drawer, but you don't cognize nothingness. You cognize the vivid phenomenon called the absence of your precious keys. Oh, you understand my point? It's a much different phenomenon than nothingness. If you think there's $5,000 in your bank, but I don't expect any money in the bank, you ask me to tell you what's there, and I'll tell you the truth, zero. Now, that's nihilism. There are no dollars in the bank, but you don't see no dollars in the bank. You see the absence of your precious $5,000. That's the real dynamic that's there. So the yogis, when they get to see not nothingness, but the absence of the I they thought that's been there since beginningless time. You can't get a more dramatic emptiness than that. Well, it's totally blissful. Don't just go into nothing. Wow, now I've got emptiness, nothingness. No. The absence of something is a phenomenon that does exist. So form is empty. So spelling it out, the phenomenon, we'll use cup. Dependent arising cup is empty of existing interdependently. Is it empty of existing is empty of existing independently? And then you flip it over. The emptiness of independent existence exists right there on that cup. So, okay, another way to put it, if things exist, you've got to point to them. If something exists, you have to point to it. So if a cup exists, you point to it. If the emptiness of independent cup is a real phenomenon that does exist, as abstract as it might be, where does it exist? Not, oh, well, it's empty of cups everywhere. No, right. Emptiness of independent cup exists exactly there on that cup. Red exists right there on that cup. You know, impermanence is the same. Impermanence is a characteristic of that cup. Emptiness of intrinsic existence is a characteristic of that cup. Color is a characteristic of that cup. Clay is a characteristic of that cup. So form, the first of the five aggregates, is empty of existing from its own side. And then emptiness of existing from its own side of that form exists right there on the form. Was empty is form. Form is empty. You can't have one without the other. So the two truths, you can't have conventional reality without ultimate. That's the thing. So we at the moment live in the two extreme views. We run like drunken sailors between the kind of, even conventionally, the characteristic of grasping at things as existing deliciously and nicely. That's the first misconception. Permanent, solid, set in stone. Wow, wow, wow. Everything's delicious. That's the misunderstanding of the dependent arising conventional reality. It's grasping at something as real, permanent, solid. Misconception. Then when we discover there isn't such a thing and we crash down to despair, we then fall into the abyss of the great mistake, and now we are nihilistic. Now I'm nihilistic. There's nothing. There's nothing. I might as well kill myself. There's nothing. They're two extremes. And look how our lives are. Emotionally, we live like this, up and down like yo-yos. There's attachment and aversion. Why do you think we kill each other, ourselves? Because we despair. There's nothing there. I'm hopeless. There's nothing. That's nihilism. It's the worst suffering on the planet. So when we misunderstand emptiness as nothingness, you hear people say, we say, oh, well, it's all empty anyway. It doesn't matter. That's completely misconception. In fact, it should be, well, everything's empty, so that's why it matters. It's the opposite. So we have to train our minds to hear the right words first. You've got to have the words first right. Don't think, oh, well, words aren't important. My God, words are totally important. You have to learn the theory first, and you'll get the cake. You can't just say, oh, well, let's look at the cake and I'll intuit the meaning. No, you won't get a cake that way, I promise. You should learn 2 of this and 4 of that and get it exactly right. Same here. So it's getting our head around the usage of these terms, and trying to make them sort of ordinary for daily life. Yeah, go. Oh, we have good. That's great. So we're going to have a mic for them. Use my mic if you like. I'm sorry, I don't want to be difficult. Okay, just do your best. Yes.
Well, the first question is, I understand how a car is dependent on its parts.
How what?
A car is dependent on its parts.
Yeah.
I'm having trouble grasping how a person is dependent on its parts.
How, which is?
A person is
person.
dependent.
It's exactly the same as a car. A person is, you've got to know. Okay, person is the name referring to you. And you, if you're a human person, so we presume if you're a human person, you've got body and you have mind. Well, there's 2 parts already. And then the body has millions of parts and the mind has millions of parts. There's this moment of mind and that moment of mind. There's anger, there's jealousy, there's love, and there's kindness. There's billions of parts. You can count far more parts in a person than you would ever in a car. Absolutely the same. You're made of parts. You're made of bits and pieces. You're made of things. Can you see that? If you talk to me directly, it's a lot easier, if you'd like to. So who asked that question? If you could understand my answer and see if it makes sense.
Jennifer.
Jennifer. Yeah. Is that Jennifer? Tell me, Jennifer.
Yeah. Yeah. The way that I understand that a part is that a car is dependent on its parts is how when you take away enough of its parts, it's no longer a car. It's the
same
shell
with
of
person people. Same with you. If you take away all the parts, there's no Jennifer left. Of course there isn't.
Okay.
But what's your understanding?
I'm like, well, it's Jennifer without all these things.
Go on. Keep talking. Go on.
I'm like, well, if you take away like my hair, like you cut my hair and you like I can't see anymore, and like I get into a burn accident.
Yeah, keep going. Keep going. If you keep going, this is a really good point to think about. If you keep going, first you establish that Jennifer's made of many parts, which is all her body and her mind. So if you take away, and also you see, okay, the Buddha would say this: the cup, as same as the person, Jennifer, the car didn't come out of nothing, did it? If you took the wheels and the axles and the engine, they're pieces of things that do exist before the car. Would you agree with that?
Okay, yeah, for sure.
You put them together and they turn into a car, don't they?
Yeah.
You agree with that?
Yes, I agree with that.
When you pull them apart, it doesn't turn into nothingness, does it? It turns into other bits of metal and bits of rubber. Would you agree with that?
When you put this stuff together, you said?
Pardon?
You said when you put this stuff together?
No, when you first put the stuff together, you get a car, don't you?
Yeah.
So when you pull the parts all away. You throw the tires away, you get rid of the metal, you get rid of the doors, you end up with no car. Would you agree with that?
No
You
car,
still end up
yeah.
with bits and pieces, don't you, that aren't any longer a car. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely.
Good.
That's
Same
how
as
I
Jennifer.
can get it.
Same as Jennifer, sweetie pie, because the parts of Jennifer called the body, you can track those back to your mummy and daddy and the grandma and all the rest. And then the mind of Jennifer, you track back to the previous mind when you were a previous person you weren't Jennifer. So that mind came and joined the egg and sperm, and that particular mind, all the characteristics joined the egg and sperm, and this became known as Jennifer. So when Jennifer dies, all the bits and pieces fall apart. The bits of the physical turn into the earth, and your mind goes on and joins another egg and sperm, and you become Joe or Fred. So there is no longer any Jennifer, but it doesn't mean there's no longer nothing.
So you mean like if I shaved my head and I got into a burn accident and I was blind, there would be no more remnants of Jennifer, possibly.
I hear what you're saying. Can you tell me what you said, Lou?
Um,
Hear the words so clearly.
She said that she had an accident and she lost her head and her mind and everything. It would
No,
no longer be.
No, go on, Jennifer. Tell me again. Go on.
I said if I like shaved my head and if I lost my sight and if I got into a car accident that I burned half my body, then there may not be any more remnants of Jennifer. That's what you're saying.
That's only your body, Jennifer. Jennifer, as long as the mind is joined up with those bits and pieces, that's what we label Jennifer. Maybe it's a very kind of broken Jennifer, but there's still Jennifer there as long as the mind and the body are together. When the mind eventually leaves those broken parts, and that's called death, then Jennifer is finished.
Yeah.
Are we communicating?
Yeah. I got in my head when you were talking about the car. I was able to relate it over.
Well, that's good. Fantastic. So
Yeah.
we're communicating, are we, Jennifer?
Yeah, we are.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Lynn.
Next question. Kimberly had asked, I don't think she's any longer online, but where does everything come from? Plants, animals, etc.
Okay, as far as this view is concerned, is the piece of the universe that we know, which is this planet, and then the bits and pieces of the sky that we see, all the other bits and pieces. There's really just two phenomena that exist as far as the Buddha is concerned. There is matter, which is made of the four elements, and that's still the concept they use. You know, now we have billions of other elements when we come to talk about science, isn't it? But the Buddhist view is especially the Vajrayana system, that there's physical matter, and that's consisting of the four elements: earth, air, fire, water. And then with that, you have minds, and that's it. And minds are beginningless, and matter is beginningless. There's no beginning to universes. There's no beginning to sentient beings, which of course sounds nutty to us because we're all wanting to find the first moment. What we're doing in the science is trying to find the first big bang, you know. But His Holiness said, he said, big bang, no problem. That's not the first one, that's all. So the concept that Buddha's saying, which is his observation, which is based on the entire Buddhist view, is that matter, you could track it back and back and back. It's the four elements. And then minds. And what's interesting in the Vajrayana system, they talk about how all minds, people, sentient beings, dogs, spirits, animals, you know, hell realms, spirit realms, all kinds of beings are all inextricably linked. All those minds are inextricably linked with their own set of the four elements. So this is how karma works. So as Lama, you know, so for example, you have four ways that karma ripens. One is a type of rebirth. So your mind, due to various actions, programs itself with compassion and goodness. And so then it runs to a mummy human, and then you get a human body. And that human body is the four elements, configured in that way due to what your mind has done. You create the cause of virtue and goodness. As His Holiness says, these hands are made by virtue. Look at lions' hands. They're not made by virtue. They're made as killing weapons. Long claws. You try to rip the flesh out of an animal with your long red nails. They won't last. So a human body is the fruit of virtue in the mind, and its own four elements then conjoin with that egg and sperm, and you turn into this particular body. So all minds beginning this time have existed, and then depending on karma, you create the cause to have an animal birth, ant birth, fire, hell realm birth. And what is a hell realm? Hell realm is your 4 elements. Effectively, your mind is conjoined with the 4 elements, predominantly fire. So the mental suffering is inconceivable. If you're in the God realms, your mind is conjoined with subtle, your elements are like subtle light, because there's so much virtue. So you have this blissful, radiant existence. So the matter of the universe. So even the way karmically external world occurs, as Lama Zopa says, for example, you might have an angry thought. Well, that programs your mind with anger. And then what it does is impact upon the elements that your mind is conjoined with. The wind energy, the subtle body, the wind energy. And that wind energy gets polluted, and eventually that becomes manifest as gross sickness caused by your previous anger. Could be lifetimes later. And in turn, eventually that impacts upon the external elements and creates imbalance of the external elements. So even the physical universes are created by minds. So there's minds and there's matter, and where they all come from are the actions of those minds from countless past lives. That's how the universe exists, and that's how it came into existence. Kimberly, hope that makes sense. Someone else there, Lou?
Yes, it says we are composed of body and mind. We can see the body, but what about the mind? We can't see it, point to it. So how is it explained?
How is what explained?
The mind.
It's explained exactly as you said. It's not physical.
Mm-hmm.
I can kind of, it's my question, Venerable Lorna
Good,
here.
Laura, go on.
So I'm just wondering if is mind a phenomena like body or table or chair?
Does it exist? So a thing that the mind cognizes is a thing that exists. So so if mind cognizes other phenomena, it's already implicit that it does exist. Would you agree with that? If mind is the cognizer of things, then clearly the mind exists. So then how do you learn to know the mind? That's a different discussion. So what we can do is we're relying upon these genius Indian yogis who developed single point of concentration, and then Buddha took that with him. So when we rely upon the experiential knowledge that they have come up with by observing their own mind, and then the entire Buddhist model of the mind, the epistemological one and the psychological one, is the presentation of their findings of how the mind functions and what it is. So then we start practicing those techniques ourselves, and eventually through that method we will know our own mind, or we'll find out they're talking a load of rubbish. As it's easy enough to talk about the mind, but to actually cognize your own mind, that's quite sophisticated because it's not physical.
Right. So it's just kind of when I'm trying to have a conversation with somebody about this and explain it, they'll go, well, how do you know it's not the brain that isn't doing?
Well, you have to find that. That's the point. You've got to find it out. What we're doing here, the level we are at the moment, we have no knowledge about anything. So Buddha's asserting it isn't the brain. He's asserting it's not physical. So then we take that as a hypothesis. We learn to see what he does say, and then you have to experience it.
Okay.
You can first be intellectually quite good about that. I think intellectually it can be quite coherent. You know, how mind can't be the brain. You can learn those things. But only the direct way to find out is to get single point of concentration, when you will develop clairvoyance and you'll develop a subtle level of mind that you can very clearly yourself see does not depend upon the brain for its existence. You can have subtle cognition. I mean, that's why the Buddhist view would say, once you stop breathing, you look like you're dead. The brain has stopped, but the mind is still there. You know, and there's lots of experiences of people in dreams, on their operating table, totally unconscious, of having vivid cognitive experiences. Those are really, really helpful experiences to read about. This book I talk about when I was editing Lama Zopa. I read this book by this American medical journalist whose expertise was death. And it's called The Undead. It's all the doubts and worries and difficulties in the medical profession now about when really death does occur. And one of the big things he's talking about is all these experiences of people, for example, when they're considered unconscious, which means the sensory consciousness, which means the brain, but they report vivid experiences while they're having an operation. And you can't argue with those experiences, you know. So as one doctor who's in that business says, I can now say with certainty, consciousness is not a function of the brain, but I don't know what it is, but I can say that much. Well, that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
You understand? So we've got to
okay, so it's the ultimate understanding. The mind is the ultimate understanding.
No, it's not the ultimate. No, emptiness is the ultimate.
But I mean, in terms of, I'm just going back to a comment you made earlier about that all phenomena are nouns, and that it's
This
something.
is my way of saying it. You won't find that in the texts.
No, I understand that, and that you can point to it. So that's just where it popped in my mind that
It has to be pointed. It has to be pointed out. Yes, that's right. Exactly.
yeah, but
to
we
be able
can't
to
do
be
that with mind,
recognized.
right?
Pardon?
But we can't do that with mind.
Of course you can. What the hell? What do you think?
But I mean
But that's what I'm discussing with single point of concentration.
right. No, okay. So I'm just taking the
When
point
you can
of that too
experience your
literally.
own mind. We don't have things like that in our modern thing. We don't trust this.
Right.
We just think mind is subjective and can't be trusted. No, of course we can get to know our minds. And when you're finally a Buddha, of course, then ultimately, absolutely, you're totally in touch with your mind. You cognize reality and you cognize the minds of others.
Right.
Utterly and clearly. It's a very subtle phenomenon. And the Buddha's fundamental point is if something exists, by definition, it can be cognized by mind. This is axiomatic.
Right.
Well, listen to the theories first, because I mean, it can't be proved immediately.
Right. Right. Yeah, I was just taking it too literally. That's
Which
helpful.
piece too literally? What do you mean by that?
When you said you should be able to point to it and
Sure.
see it, so that's all.
I meant, yeah, I didn't mean physically. I mean, I didn't mean like that.
Okay.
Then, okay, honey, child, listen to this. That's not the proof. You cannot point to a physical thing called the absence of tea. It's totally conceptual, but it's still a valid cognition.
Right.
You can't, it's got no shape, no color. You don't need to think about the mind as having no shape and no color. The absence of tea is a very vivid thing that your mind is cognizing, but you can't point to it. It's got no shape, no color. You can't put it anywhere, but it's a very real phenomenon. That's an abstract phenomenon. They call it permanent in Buddhism.
Okay.
That's still real. Do you understand my point?
Yep, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Other people got questions there?
Dawn has a question.
Okay, what's your question, please, Dawn?
Thank you for your teaching today, Venerable. Lately, I've been meditating on like what I can see or cognize outside of like the outside, like say Mr. Trump or pride or lust or anger
So,
or
just a minute,
low
stop. What do you
self-esteem.
mean? Sorry, stop. Your first part has nothing to do with the second part. You just said cognizing what's on the outside. What do you mean by that?
So,
Then you said your
when
mind.
when I see an example outside myself, like whatever I'm considering myself,
I
like
don't
an
understand those
affliction.
points. No, Dawn, that has no meaning. What do you mean outside yourself?
So when I
Your
see
mind
an
is not outside. Stop. Your negative energy, your attachment, your anger are not outside yourself. They're your mind. So what are you talking
Right.
about cognizing? Your mind.
So when I see example of that in the world,
But nothing to do with the outside. What do you mean by the outside world? Somebody else's mind, you mean?
right, when I see it, it's an aspect
See
of my
what,
own
Dawn?
mind.
See
It's an
what,
aspect
Dawn?
when I see like pride or anger or
In whose
low,
mind, Dawn?
when I see an example of that in
In
the
whose
world,
mind, Dawn?
in my mind,
Well, that's
I
not
feel that's
outside you. That's not outside you. It's inside you. So what's the question again? Start your question again.
because it's
Start the
because it's
question again, please.
okay. So when I see an example that I'm sort of
You see an example of your delusions. Good. That's what being a Buddhist does. So what's the question?
So when I see the physical manifestation of that outside myself, I can reflect and see those
I don't know
aspects
what
of
you're
my
talking about outside yourself, Dawn. That has no meaning whatsoever. So the
just
one bit I can get, please quiet. The one piece I can get is you're saying, when you're beginning your question, when I see my delusions, okay, attachment or anger. So now what's the next part of the question? When I see my delusions, what's your question about those delusions?
when I see my delusions in my own mind, it seems like a reflection of the outside world.
I
Like
don't know what
I
you're
can
talking about. How do you mean by that?
so say I see Mr. Trump. Like
So
I
see
can
Mr. Trump is there, and then in your mind it's called anger. So what's the question?
no, when I see whatever I'm judging him to be, I can
I
look.
just said it. You see Mr. Trump, and then you see anger about Mr. Trump in your mind. So what's the question?
Well, when I see his aspect of lying and these kind of things, I can look inward and knowing that that's
So what's your
a
question,
manifestation
Dawn?
of my mind.
What's your question?
I'm just
No, I don't want a statement.
sometimes.
I don't want a statement. I don't want
No,
a
I'm
statement.
not.
I want a
Yeah, I
question.
have a question.
So you don't have a question.
I do have a question.
Okay, what's your question,
So,
Dawn?
so the reflection in the world that I can see, and then I look at my own mind, whatever I can see in the outside
So
world, and I
what's
look
your
in.
question, Dawn? Question, not a statement.
Sometimes it starts to seem like all is one, and I'm wondering if there's
I
a
don't know
mistake
what
in
you're
the.
talking about, Dawn. This is just nonsense. All is one. What are you talking about? I want a
Well,
question from you, Dawn. Dawn,
I just
I
want.
want a
I want to
question.
know.
Dawn,
I
I
just want
want
to
a
know if
question.
is
I
there a
want a
mistake in my.
question.
Is there a mistake in my contemplation that
Is what?
when whatever
Is what?
I'm asking if there's a mistake in my contemplation when I see an aspect of my mind manifesting in the outside world.
I
Like
don't
I
know what those
realize
words mean. I wish you'd keep it more simple. So maybe think about it more and ask me again later. Because it's not very clear. It's too many. You've been
well
reading too many books.
the
Leave it for
result
later,
of
Dawn.
this thinking.
Ask me later when the question's more simple. Okay, darling? Thank you.
Thank you.
Go, Lou. What else? Lou, what else? Nothing else. That's it. Okay. So any more questions? Yes, sweetheart. Go talk to me. We're over here. Yes, that's right. Yes. Good, darling.
I can construct and deconstruct the body and not find
Yes.
the I.
You can find the I.
I cannot.
Oh, no, okay,
I
good.
cannot
Good.
find it.
Yes, yes.
I don't know how. My question is, how do I construct and deconstruct the
The mind.
mind?
I know.
Because that's where I tend to think.
Yeah, that's
the I
it. And
is.
if that's exactly right. That's exactly right. If we feel anything is the I, at least it must be the mind. And even if we think of in relation to reincarnation, because the body doesn't come from the past and the body won't go, but the mind will. So it's a good point. So, but the point is also the Buddha's saying that the mind can't be the I. So this is where I think it's the mind. If the mind is the I, it's going to be the same as the body being the I, because it means it's the same thing. And if your mind is the I and the I is the mind, then they must be the same thing. Would you agree with that? They have to be the same thing.
I agree with that. And
Yeah.
again,
So if they're the same thing, then why would you say I have anger, I have jealousy, I have love? Because they're separate things. You couldn't say that. It's not viable. If the mind is the I. Go on.
my mind has anger.
That's better. That's good. That's a good way to put it.
My
That's
mind.
completely different. That's better. And that's why the Buddhists, the Tibetans, especially when you're studying all this, you say it's a good quality, it's a good thing to say instead of I am angry, I am depressed. It reinforces this unhappy I. It's excellent to say there's anger, there's generosity, there is love, there is compassion. It's really helpful to say that. That's good. That's good.
So just keep working with that concept.
Yes, exactly. That's perfect. That's exactly right. Exactly.
Thank
And
you.
see, the interesting point too with this word I, because you see, as soon as we hear there's no I, all these questions are coming because we think there is an I, and then as soon as we hear Buddha say there isn't one, we chuck the baby out for bathwater. But the dependent arising words are there, as Lama Zopa says, there is an I, but not as concrete as we think. Really. There is an I, but it's not the mind, it's not the body, it's merely labeled I. So that's just they're the words for it. It's the name you give to those parts. It's cup. So we don't realize that when we say there is a cup, we're instinctively grasping at this whole entity being an absolute from its own side cup. But cup, we can see it. I mean, this is the thing, even when we begin to establish how things exist, I'll say to my mother, well, what's that, mummy? And she'll say, that's called a cup. Now, I've never heard of it yet. And this is how we learn to know what's existing. She will then say, well, can you see? She'll give me the definition. And the definition has two parts. And the first part will be its conventional characteristics. Well, she'll see, can you see this flat bottom clay container? That's the first part. And you see it. Then the second part is the crucial piece. It's what it does. But what does it mean? What does it do? What's its function? It holds my tea. So that's what we call a cup. But then we have to then realize that that cup, that thing that holds tea, you won't find an intrinsic thing that holds a tea. That's merely its function. So when you realize there's no cup from its own side, that cup is merely the name we give to those parts. That's comfortable then. We can say that. That's spacious. It's the name we give to those parts. And it functions exactly as we said. It really does hold my tea. So it's just getting used to these two ways. There is a dependent arising cup that exists in dependence upon part and name, and there's no cup from its own side. These two come together. It doesn't contradict if we get the right words, you know? Do you understand?
I definitely understand the cup example. And I understand
It's the same for I, no difference.
with my mind. I guess I just need to keep working on
Yeah, keep working like that.
and think of it in terms of my mind as love. I don't have
Yeah,
love.
that's it.
My mind
It's
has,
really it's the better way. We can, so speaking ordinarily, you'd say, I feel love. It's fine. Say it like that. Or even the one that they make a joke about it. You say, strictly speaking, you would say, what's your name again?
Barbara.
Oh, that's right, Barbara. So you'd say, I am the person called Barbara. You would not say, I am Barbara. That's a mistake. And as Lama Zopa, there's always that lovely story when he was a little boy, 8 years old, and he'd already been recognized as a reincarnation of the previous yogi. And he was drowning up in the mountains, you know, he was drowning. And he said, the thought occurred to me, the person known as the Laudo Lama is about to die. He didn't say, I am dying, which is what we'd say with panic. The person known as the Laudo Lama is about to die. And then he said, well, I didn't know anything about emptiness, but there's no fear. So that's a really good way to say it. But and that's correct, not I am Barbara. Because Barbara is the name given to those bits. Barbara is synonymous with I. It's the name of this particular I, and it's the name we give to those particular pieces. Jennifer's the name we give to her particular pieces. The pieces have all gone. Jennifer's gone, but the pieces continue and then get a new name called Fred or Joe or Lion. Do you understand? So it's loosening this way we use the word I in our own life is very intense. It's really helpful. There is anger. There is compassion, you know. There is love. Because the mind has many parts. And then when we start to meditate, we think, well, I am watching the breath. We have this big feeling of a big lump of something watching the breath. It's your mind watching the breath. Your body's not watching the breath. And then you've got to say, which part of my mind is watching my breath? Well, mindfulness does its bit. Concentration does its bit. Good memory does its bit. There are all these bits and pieces working hand in hand to watch the breath. It's more spacious, you know. You understand?
I do.
Good,
Thank
Barbara.
you.
Yeah, Barbara. Of course, Barbara, thank you. What else, people? Yes.
So I have in my notes, the wrong view, it's all empty, so it doesn't matter. But the opposite is true. It's all empty, so it matters a lot.
In a way, you could say like that, because it's empty, it actually matters instead of this nihilistic way we have a feeling, you know, it doesn't matter.
And does that mean, I'm thinking of it more as like impermanent and changeable. Like, you know, war isn't this like permanent thing, it's changeable. So that's why it matters, so we can actually do something about it. So that's why, like, is that why emptiness matters?
Okay,
we can
I
actually
understand.
kind of
Okay, in the Buddhist view, there are different ways if there are different ways he presents how things exist. So karma is one of them, massive. Impermanence is one of the first ones he has. So this is, and already if we could realize impermanence, there's nothing set in stone, all of it's a much grosser teaching than the one of emptiness, but it leads us to understand emptiness. So even in some of the viewpoints, when you study Buddhist tenets, the different views and the different traditions in Buddhism over the centuries, they've kind of put them all together as a series of different viewpoints, all specifically of emptiness. And so there's one particular view in the earlier views that actually they think that what's called subtle impermanence is in fact emptiness, but it can easily be mistaken. So there's gross impermanence and there's subtle impermanence, and then there's emptiness. It gets ever more subtle, but it's a good start to think about impermanence. It leads us to realize the emptiness. And we understand it more easily. Do you understand? That's good, yeah. But don't equate it with emptiness. Emptiness is more subtle.
Okay.
Do you understand?
I mean, in a gross way, I understand, but not
You what?
in a gross way. I
No, well, that's
understand.
good enough. Let's start somewhere. Yes, exactly. But impermanence is a really good start. And Buddha's got two levels. He's got the gross impermanence, things get born and they die, you know. The subtle one, and you can only realize this in concentration and meditation. They call it subtle impermanence, that the very coming into existence of something implies its cessation. It's a much more subtle understanding. And that's one of the major meditations in the Hinayana path. And they even say that they can even sometimes in the views they confuse that with gross emptiness. So it can easily be mistaken. But understanding impermanence is a great way to lead you to realize emptiness. It's very helpful. Someone else, people. Well, that's enough, is it, today, maybe? Is that enough? More questions? No? Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. That'll do for now. We're going to do this topic again another day, aren't we? More, aren't we? Dendrup? Next week. Okay, good. Yeah. See, the thing is, dependent arising seems more palatable. But sort of get your kind of hands on it, you know. But emptiness seems kind of spacey. So stick to dependent arising. Nothing wrong. It implies emptiness, and we'll get it one day. But as soon as we realize that things are, like, for example, as His Holiness said, easy, he said, when the person asked how to apply emptiness in daily life. All he said was see things as dependent arising, which means what appears to you is dependent upon what's in your mind. That's what he's telling us. So you know very well. That's why my friends in prison. There's such powerful examples. There they are, an example of this woman, Sunny, living in this hell, accused of murdering 2 policemen. Her husband is executed. His head burst into flames. She's lost her children, lost her parents. She's in a cell on her own with a Bible for like 12 years, and she's innocent. Well, guess what she did? She saw things from another point of view. It's as simple as that. And why? So she can get happy. It's like a miracle. It's like outrageous, beyond belief. It's unbelievable. But who wants to do it? Nobody. We want to say, I'm right and you're wrong. This is how it is, we say. So that's applying emptiness straight away, right there. Things don't have an intrinsic existence. That's all Buddha's telling us. That's all he's telling us. So stick to that one. You're getting annoyed with your sister. Simply see it from another point of view. Even Mr. Trump, Dawn's thing about Mr. Trump. Even that. The first thing, if you don't like Mr. Trump, is you hear him lie and steal and shout and yell and whatever. No, just see him from another point of view as well. Right there, you'll see something different. Right there. We only see what we want to see. We only see what's in it from our mind. As Lama Zopa says, as they say in the Buddhist psychology, whatever exists out there appears back to us in the aspect of what's in our mind. So knowing that, when we change our mind, we change the universe, you know. We can see it's true. I mean, Sunny is not religious. She's not interested in karma. She's out of prison now. She has no interest in karma, Buddhism, or anything. She just had her own intelligence. She said, finally, I realized I couldn't change anything, but they couldn't take my mind from me. So she changed her mind. Literally worked on her own self, found her own methods, did yoga, learned it, taught herself, learned. She said, I would give myself 5 minutes to be raging angry, and then I would stop. And she'd work on her mind again. I find it so inconceivable, so incredible. It's so rare to have some person like that with no background, you know. She's such a brilliant example, just intelligence. She could actually see that her sanity and her happiness depended not even on this disgusting cell and this evil nonsense nightmare of being murder of 2 policemen and everything. It depended on her own mind. It's incredible, mind-blowing. I mean, she's the best example on the planet because she's not religious and has no background, you know. She saw this as true. And so she came out of prison. You meet her now. I mean, I know so many people have been in prison and they've been kind of broken emotionally. You can feel their brokenness. You meet this old lady. She's in a wheelchair. She's just this little old lady. You'd never in a million years ever know anything about the 17 years of hell, you know, because she dealt with it. She changed her mind. She's this happy little old lady, you know, because she changed her mind. It's all Buddha's telling us. Change your mind. See things differently. It's a miracle. So let's try. Dangchub sem chog Rinpoche, ma ke panam ke yuchig, ke pa nyampam me pa yang gong ne gondu pelpa shog, ke wa din yudu dag lama sange drub ne drowa tikyang malu pa, ke sala pa shog. Let's do the swift return prayer, please. There it is, I said it too quickly. So due to the merits of these virtuous actions, of listening to these teachings, may we quickly attain the state of the Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. Okay, darling, the swift prayer. Jungshub, Semchog. Yeah, okay, His Holiness Dalai Lama, the wish fulfilling, go back, sorry, yeah. Wish fulfilling dual source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech. May all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. But now this lovely prayer His Holiness wrote, Lama Zopa, peerless teacher, an assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice. You wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable, venerable Guru, to you I make this request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. Such a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. So may Lama Zopa come back soon. Okay, everybody, thank you so much, people. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So you see, Dundrup lunchtime works. Everyone always says to me, oh, you can't have classes at lunchtime. People at work. I mean, that's 1950.